Hello everyone, my name is Lynn from SMK Damansara Jaya, Jaya. I am sure many of you have heard the term climate change before, but how many of us have actually cared to acknowledge the urgency of the impact of climate change? When I was just a young kid, I would always love to go to my neighborhood park in the evening, every day without fail. It was my own little paradise, as I loved to pick up the pine cones that were scattered on the ground. These happy childhood days were unexpectedly short-lived, to my dismay, as Malaysia started being engulfed by haze due to the slash-and-burn practices, open burning, along with the dry weather, thus accelerating climate change and worsening air pollution, forcing us to wear a mask and stay indoors. I contracted a terrible flu and cough due to the horrible air quality in Jaya. My brother also suffered from asthma, and he had to spend an entire year to fully recover from his respiratory illness. Truth to be told, climate change has actually emerged a long time before human civilization. Let's go back to millions of years ago, when dinosaurs ruled the earth. The mass wipeout of these colossal animals have been linked to theories of meteor strikes and huge volcanic eruptions, which cause climate change and the Earth's temperature to rise. Even the last ice age about 80,000 years ago can be taken as a fantastic example of climate change. This leads us to the question, what is climate change? In general terms, climate change is the average increase in global temperature, rising sea levels, and ocean acidity. It is also referred to the retreating ice along with increasingly extreme weather patterns that threaten our entire global ecosystem. The main cause which contributes to this phenomenon is the enhanced greenhouse effect. Some of the sun's energy is reflected back to space when it reaches the Earth's atmosphere, whereas the rest is absorbed and re-radiated by greenhouse gases. For example, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen dioxide, and also CFCs, which are the main cause of ozone layer depletion. The absorbed energy warms the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth, thus contributing to climate change. What's so scary about climate change? Why was this topic discussed so heavily in recent years, especially in 2019, which saw Greta Thunberg, a 17-year-old Swedish climate activist, become the coveted Times Person of the Year? Well, climate change may be quite new to our ears, but in fact, scientists have long argued and completed studies on the catastrophic effects of climate change, warning that our Earth is heading down a path of no turning back. The year 2019 was the second warmest year in history after 2016, and the Earth is now nearly 1 degree warmer than it was before industrialization shook up the world. The following impacts of climate change have proved unprecedented, including extreme weather patterns, extinction of wildlife, severe effects to our economy, our health, and even our way of life. Firstly, increasing global temperatures have undoubtedly paved the way for more extreme weather patterns and natural disasters, including droughts, tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, and floods. Over the past 25 years, the figures of natural disasters have only risen, such as Cyclone Idai in Africa, Typhoon Hagibis in Japan, Hurricane Katrina in USA, which resulted in damages amounting to $81 billion, the costliest in US history. Global warming has directly contributed to the melting of ice caps, glaciers, and reduction of snow cover in Peru, Switzerland, and the equatorial glaciers of Puncak Jaya in Indonesia. The Greenland ice sheet is forecasted to raise sea levels by 6 meters if it melts entirely. More than 80% of the snows of Kilimanjaro have been reduced to nothing, whereas part of the Himalayan glaciers are at risk of disappearing by 2035. Arctic sea ice has also thinned greatly over the past half-century. Animals such as polar bears, harp seals, and narwhals are also endangered. All this melting has caused cities to face the danger of being submerged in the near future due to rising ocean levels. In fact, the iconic St. Square of Venice now floods more than 60 times a year, an enormous leap from 4 times a year in 1900, and will be completely submerged by the year 2100. Even last year, Indonesia even decided to relocate its capital, Jakarta. Cities such as Shanghai and Bangkok are also at risk of severe floods, as their human populations are concentrated near coastal plains or river deltas. Even our country suffers from floods which are worsening every year in Kelantan and Terengganu, causing drownings, injuries and damages to homes. The worst case in recent years caused more than 200,000 people to be evacuated to flood relief centers. The extreme temperatures have also played a big role in triggering the Australia bushfires. The wildfires have scorched an area larger than the US state of Indiana since September 2019. Those animals that survived the actual fire would die later because of lack of food or habitats. I happen to have a close relative who stays in Melbourne, one of the affected areas. He described the situation as utterly suffocating, as there was thick smoke everywhere, and the quality had become one of the worst in the world. Recent uncontrolled blazes in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil have also greatly impacted its role as the world's largest carbon sink, releasing large amounts of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and disrupting the global carbon cycle. Due to these extreme temperatures, climate change resulted in heat waves across the globe that broke records. In 2015, parts of India were gripped in an intense heat wave that killed more than 2,300 people, with temperatures rising above 43 degrees. The weather was even hot enough to melt pavements in New Delhi. Who knew that climate change would result in an all-time record of 51 degrees a year later in Rajasthan, India? Heat waves across Europe in at least 12 countries experienced record-breaking temperatures, including Germany, UK, and France. One of the greatest impacts of climate change is the extinction of wildlife. Take the Australia tragedy, for instance, which has already driven the green carpenter bee to extinction in Victoria and South Australia. More than 1 billion mammals, birds, and reptiles nationwide may have been affected or killed. About half of all the world's species could go extinct because of climate change in the next 80 years. Oceanic bird species are directly threatened by rising sea levels, which can submerge their coastal habitats. Even the nesting beaches of Rantau Abang's leatherback turtles in Terengganu, Malaysia, are being inundated by rising sea levels. The region has not recorded any sightings of these turtles in recent years. In addition, whales are particularly sensitive to specific ocean temperatures for their migration and reproductive habits. The rising sea temperatures will endanger the entire whale population. Meanwhile, ocean heat waves can destroy entire reef ecosystems and the marine life that rely on coral reefs for food and shelter. Mass coral bleaching events in 2016 and 2017 tragically wiped out half of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Even our country's coral reefs are also being threatened, especially in East Malaysia. Climate change impacts worker productivity and negatively affects economic sectors such as forestry, fisheries, and tourism, as many types of tourism are weather dependent. On average, the fish yield in global critical fisheries have dropped due to the metabolic stress and the decline in zooplankton the fish have to endure due to warmer waters. Agriculture has also been greatly impacted due to changing precipitation and temperature patterns. There is a huge looming threat of food insecurity in the future. Some regions will experience drought, but other regions will suffer from torrential rains and increased flooding. Depletion of water supply will decrease productivity of crops and livestock. New pest pathogens and weed problems will emerge. Besides, surging sea levels will also result in the complete loss of agricultural land. Health-wise, the incredible heat waves have put many at risk of heat stroke. The supply of fresh water is likely to be disrupted by increasingly variable rainfall patterns. This will lower hygiene levels and put thousands at risk of diarrheal disease. It will also lead to drought and famine. Malnutrition, which currently causes 3.1 million deaths every year, will subsequently plague the people without access to food security. Furthermore, climate change is likely to alter the geographic range of important vector-borne diseases like dengue fever and malaria. The Klang Valley in Selangor also constantly undergoes water rationing due to the critical water supply. Subsequently, Climate change causes anxiety and depression due to the horrifying losses from a disaster such as a home, job, and your loved ones. Frontliners such as first responders and emergency workers are particularly affected by this both in the short and long term. Lastly, climate change creates mass migration around the world. Immigrants are fleeing homes struck by extreme weather in search of further, safer locations to live. By 2050, climate change is projected to force 700 million people to leave their homes, which is an astonishing figure. All these big numbers that I have thrown to the air may have already sent you to shock and despair. But how much worse could this problem get? For decades, researchers have argued that a global temperature rise must be kept below 2 degrees by the end of this century to avoid the worst impacts. Countries that participated in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord pledged to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. They also agreed to adopt new measures to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees. However, scientists have now come to a consensus that we actually need to keep the increase in temperature to below 1.5 degrees. Before this, the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 set emission-cutting targets for some of the developed countries, but the US pulled out and others failed to comply to the targets. The US has also planned to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement in November, despite being one of the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, which certainly poses as a major setback in achieving the set goals to curb the effects of climate change. Now, although Malaysia might not be one of the top polluters in the world, Malaysia has started doing its part by engaging in some proactive measures to address the problem. For instance, the government has started investing in the development of low-carbon cities in places like Petaling Jaya, Putrajaya, and others. Malaysia hopes to reduce our carbon footprint and reach a target emission reduction of 346,000 tons of carbon dioxide. In addition, our government has agreed to launch a 100 million tree planting program, which is a laudable effort in reducing greenhouse gases. On a similar note, 66 countries have already drafted plans to become carbon neutral by 2050. Official ecological and climate emergencies have already been declared by London and Paris, yet developing economies have shown no sign of planning to eliminate fossil fuels. Therefore, we as youth have to start spreading awareness and make our voices heard in the global community. We ourselves can make an active effort by using public transport and purchasing energy-efficient appliances to reduce our carbon output in our everyday lives. Around 2,400 pounds of carbon dioxide could be saved each year if we recycle about half of our household waste. We should also pressure big corporations to act and disclose on their climate-related risks. The government needs to step up regulation by introducing carbon tax policies to limit the nation's carbon emissions. Member states of ASEAN should engage in more dialogue to achieve better coordination in implementation of policies in areas such as peatland conservation, forest fire, and transboundary haze control. In conclusion, climate change has undeniably put our lives at risk, and we must provide our full cooperation to support measures to address this urgent problem. Think of all the wildlife and people across the earth that are at stake. Therefore, it is time we adopt the New Deal for Nature and People, NDNP, to heal our bleeding Mother Earth and build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature by 2030. As I quote from Greta Thunberg, who leads the Fridays for Future movement, the climate crisis has already been solved. We already have all the facts and solutions. All we have to do is wake up and change. Thank you.
Thank you, Zolin, for sharing your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
True what Zolin said. All we need to do is wake up. Then she said. With the support from UNICEF, I just want to share a bit. We recently did a survey on Malaysians' understanding of climate change. And about 92.3% of the respondents agreed that climate change causes negative effects on our life. This means many of us are aware of the facts and solutions, and all we need to do is change. Speaking of change, our next speaker, Abdul Muthalib from SMK Durian, Tunggal Melaka, will be speaking more on how can we make daily changes to save our planet. Over to you, Muthalib.
Hi everyone. Bumi kita kini semakin tenat. Tiap hari sampah makin bertingkat. Suhu bumi pula kian meningkat. Jaga-jaga sendiri mahu ingat. Saya Abdul Muthalib bin Abdul Razak dari SMK Durian Tunggal Melaka ingin menyampaikan sebuah pembentangan yang bertajuk Impak Perubahan Iklim Terhadap Persekitaran. Bumi kita semakin tenat. Banyak fenomena perubahan iklim berlaku sekeliling kita. Bumi semakin panas, kemarau berpanjangan, kadang-kadang hujan ekstrim tak henti-henti. Lepas hujan, banjir pula yang datang. Kerosakan harta benda dan ada yang kehilangan nyawa. Di tanah Arab pula, di gunung Kontang, kini tiba-tiba salji menutupi pasir. Sekarang pula, catatan air di Melaka dek kena paras air dan kian merosot. Orang cakap, orang Malaysia diam diri. Tak kisah kalau iklim berubah. Tak kisah boleh duduk makan kopi peri dengan berita. Hei, aku tak macam tu lah. Aku marah. Siapa punca? Engkau, kamu, dia, mereka, kita. Kita yang bersalah. Kita semua yang bersalah. Ya, kita yang bersalah. Manusia rakus, manusia yang tamak, manusia yang tidak bertanggung jawab, manusia yang berbuat tak nampak dan pekak badak, semuanya kerana wang ringgit. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, fenomena perubahan iklim. 1. Kemarau. Di setengah kawasan, hujan tidak turun dalam jangka masa yang lama. Pada tahun 2015, di Bali dan di Jawa Timur, tidak menerima hujan lebih daripada 216 hari. Manakala di Sumba Timur, tidak menerima hujan lebih daripada 249 hari. Lama betul tak hujan. Agak-agaknya, apa yang terjadi di bumi Indonesia? Musim kering terburuk sejak tahun 2015 ini menjadikan bumi Indonesia tandus dan menjejaskan nasib pertanian dan penternakan. Ia merugikan dan memberi kesan kepada ekonomi, ekosistem alam dan manusia kekurangan sumber makanan. 2. Hujan ekstrim. Menurut kajian data hujan selama 11 tahun oleh penyelidik Universiti Utara Malaysia, mendapati kebanyakan session hujan telah berlaku peningkatan luar biasa, terutama session hujan di Alor, Ampang Pedu dan Sintok. Pada tahun 2017, Pulau Pinang dihujani hujan lebat selama 5 hari dan melebihi penurunan luar biasa dan ia tidak pernah berlaku. Lantas menyebabkan banjir besar di seluruh negeri Pulau Pinang. 3. Banjir ekstrim. Menurut laporan, banjir besar di negeri Kelantan dan Terengganu pada Disember 2004 telah menjejaskan 500,000 penduduk dan yang memberikan kerugian harta benda serta infrastruktur mencecah 3 bilion ringgit. Hakikatnya, setiap kali musim-musim timur laut, kebarangkalian banjir besar berulang meningkat. Banjir besar seperti yang berlaku di Maniurai Kelantan pada tahun 2004 telah menyebabkan 3 tingkat SMK Maniurai tenggelam. Manakala pada tahun 2007, banjir besar di Johor telah menenggelamkan hampir keseluruhan bandar kota tinggi, termasuklah bank, kompleks Muli Belah. Malah pada gelombang kedua, ia hampir-hampir menerjam masuk dalam hospital daerah kota tinggi. Dahsyat kan? Memang dahsyat. Harap-harap banjir ekstrim ini tidak berlaku lagi. 4. Tanah Arab dituruni salji. Ya, umum mengetahui bahawa bumi tanah Arab mempunyai kawasan gurun pasir yang panas. Namun, baru-baru ini satu ribu kuat dengan sudah bertekad beku telah membadai kawasan gurun Arab Saudi yang telah mengubah pemandangan. daripada kawasan gurun kepada sebuah pemandangan taman tema musim sejuk. Penduduk di daerah Tabuk yang terletak 193 km daripada Laut Mati teruja melihat gurun yang panas itu dilitupi salji. Menurut ahli meteorologi AccuWeather, Eric Lester, ribut yang dikesan daripada selatan Eropah dan Mediterranean serta menuju ke Timur Tengah yang telah membawa udara sejuk ke negara tersebut dan tersedia salji di kawasan berkenaan. 5. Paras air empangan menurun. Dalam keadaan cuaca panas dan kering serta taburan hujan yang kurang di Melaka, paras air sungai juga turun menyebabkan beberapa loji rawatan air terpaksa mengurangkan bekalan air terawat. Isu yang baru kita hadapi ialah catuan air. Catuan air berlaku kerana paras air yang menurun 0.5% sejak sebulan lalu. Kini, ketiga empangan itu mempunyai paras air sebanyak 24,390 juta liter air. Empangan Durian Tunggal yang ada di kawasan tempat tinggal saya kini mempunyai paras air 5,670 juta liter air berbanding 32,600 juta liter air, iaitu kehilangan air sebanyak 82.6%. Kesannya ramai yang mandi sebagai air setiap pagi kan? Janganlah tipu saya pun macam tu. Hadirin sekalian, apakah punca perubahan iklim? Pembakaran bahan api fosil telah menghasilkan gas rumah hijau. Gas rumah hijau? Apa itu gas rumah hijau? Contohnya, karbon dioksida, karbon monoksida, metana dan nitrogen dioksida. Semakin banyak gas rumah hijau dibebaskan oleh kenderaan, kilang dan stesen jana kuasa, semakin meningkat peratusan gas rumah hijau di atmosfera. Lalu, menyebabkan gas rumah hijau. Lalu, haba terperangkap. Lalu, pemanasan global berlaku. Lalu, cuaca tidak menentu. Lalu, iklim bumi berubah. Lalu, bumi semakin tenang. Berapa banyak lalu dah. Asap kereta dan motor, asap kilang dan asap rokok, semuanya jadi punca. Bumi kini jadi panas. Asap kereta dan motor, asap kilang dan asap rokok, semuanya jadi punca. Bumi kini jadi panas. Pengeluaran gas rumah hijau di Malaysia sudah meningkat, iaitu sebanyak 221% antara tahun 1990 hingga 2004. 5 penyumbang terhadap pengeluaran gas rumah hijau di Malaysia adalah penjanaan kuasa elektrik, iaitu sebanyak 30% jumlah karbon dioksida. Seterusnya, daripada pengangkutan jalan raya adalah sebanyak 10.8%. Manakala daripada pelupusan sisa pepejar sebanyak 10.2%. Daripada operasi minyak dan gas adalah sebanyak 10.4%. Manakala daripada industri perkilangan dan pembinaan sebanyak 8%. Sudahlah manusia belum memegang gas rumah hijau. Pembangunan pesat turut memusnahkan kawasan hutan. Penebangan pokok secara berleluasa antara faktor pemanasan global berlaku. Mengapa ya? Pokok adalah satu-satunya harapan manusia untuk menyerap karbon dioksida secara semula jadi semasa menjalankan proses fotosintesis. Penyerapan gas karbon dioksida ini dapat merendahkan paras karbon dioksida di atmosfera. Akhirnya, kepekatan karbon dioksida di atmosfera menjadi tepu dan menyebabkan bumi semakin panas. Dalam peralihan Malaysia yang mengamalkan polisi rendah karbon dan iklim berdaya tahan, banyak strategi yang boleh dilakukan. Antaranya, teknologi tenaga boleh baharu seperti solar, hidro, biomas dan angin bagi menghasilkan tenaga elektrik untuk kegunaan di rumah, di pejabat dan kenderaan. Dengan kaedah ini, ia menjimatkan dan menguntungkan dalam jangka masa yang panjang. Malah ia mampu mengurangkan pembebasan gas rumah hijau ke atmosfera sekaligus dapat minimalkan pemanasan global berlaku. Pihak kerajaan dan badan swasta perlulah mempuluskan lagi perkhidmatan pengangkutan awam supaya lebih efisien dan menyeluruh menyeliputi semua kawasan utama di Malaysia. Kempen kesedaran bagi penggunaan pengangkutan awam perlu dipergiat supaya mentaliti masyarakat Malaysia berubah ke arah dalam mengamalkan pembudayaan melestarikan alam. Dengan menggunakan pengangkutan awam, kita mampu mengurangkan pembebasan gas rumah hijau ke atmosfera dan semestinya menjimatkan dan memudahkan urusan harian kita. Amalan 3R perlu diterap sejak semasa kanak-kanak lagi supaya pembudayaan reduce, reuse, recycle dapat diamalkan walau di mana jua berada. Dengan kaedah ini, jumlah sisa organik dan bukan organik dapat dikurangkan dan akhirnya jumlah sampah di kawasan perusahaan sampah dapat dikurangkan. Proses perkutan oleh mikroorganisma pengurai dapat dikurangkan yang bebaskan karbon dioksida ke udara. Selain itu, kita juga perlu mengurangkan penggunaan biar plastik dan polusi kerana apabila pemanasan, pembakaran atau perkutan berlaku terhadap material tersebut, ia akan membebaskan gas rumah hijau ke atmosfera. Langkah kerajaan negeri Melaka dalam mengharamkan penggunaan beg plastik boleh dijadikan satu KPI kepada seluruh negeri di Malaysia agar penggunaan beg plastik dapat dikurangkan. Umum sedia maklum bahawa karbon dioksida dapat diserap oleh tumbuhan secara alami semasa menjalankan proses fotosintesis. Seluruh rakyat Malaysia perlu dan seharusnya menanamkan lebih banyak lagi pokok supaya dapat membantu proses penyerapan karbon dioksida. Kempen penanaman pokok dilakukan di rumah, di sekolah, di pejabat dan di sekitar kawasan rumah, sama ada di bandar ataupun luar bandar. Kesimpulannya, keseimbangan alam sekitar amat penting bagi mengekalkan iklim persekitaran dan iklim dunia. Bencana yang melanda ini sememangnya berpunca daripada kerakusan dan tamak haluban manusia sehingga melupakan tanggungjawab dalam memelihara dan memelihara alam sekitar. Tangan-tangan manusia yang tidak bertanggungjawab ini menyebabkan musibah ditanggung oleh sekian manusia di bumi ini. Sebelum terlambat, ayo sahabat-sahabat, seluruh rakyat Malaysia bergani bahu untuk sama-sama mengamalkan pembudayaan melestarikan alam. Kita sama-sama amalkan pembudayaan hijau dalam segenap aspek agar bumi ini terus terjaga. Dengan usaha kecil kita ini, sedikit sebanyak mampu mengubah dunia. Isu dah sudah, punca dah sudah, solusi sudah, semua pun sudah, kita berubah. Ayo berubah, mari berubah, janji berubah. Isu dah sudah, punca dah sudah, solusi sudah, semua pun sudah, kita berubah. Ayo berubah, mari berubah, janji berubah. Selamatkan bumi kita, our earth, our duty. Sekian, terima kasih.
Terima kasih Muthalib. Betul kata Muthalib, negara kita sekarang menyaksikan banyak perubahan cuaca yang dilihat ekstrim dan menjadi semakin sukar untuk diramal. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Next, I would like to welcome our very last storyteller, Suvitha Balakrishnan from IPG Tuanku Bainun, to speak on how to protect ourselves against climate change effects. Over to you, Suvitha.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. We're killing the earth and that's really fun. No one believes us because we are young. Our forests are turning to ash in a second. Ask California, they'll tell you about it. They'll tell you how they have lost all their home. While Thompson's a blind guy tweets on his phone. Global warming is expensive little hoax for the last time. This is not a joke. Our factories are working and toxins are emitting. Our ozone is crumbling, but we won't stop putting chemicals in while we're trying to breathe. Our future is stolen and we are the thieves. Sea levels are rising and icebergs are melting. The coral reefs are dying and no one is helping. Do you realize to keep the ocean alive? This started back in 1985. Don't come to me when your child can't think of what a tiger is because they think. Don't cry to me when your fur coat and clean. The endangered list is now 41,416. Dear 2045, I don't think we're gonna survive. If you end up hearing the story, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Well, that was pretty devastating to hear, wasn't it? Let me tell you that this is not a joke. We are living in a beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down and it is a catastrophe. The rise in global temperature over the last several decades is a matter of public record. This is an overwhelming scientific consensus that can be only explained by one thing: the rise in greenhouse gas emission caused by human activities. Plus, gaining an extra half degree may cost our existence. And almost 11,000 scientists have agreed upon that human extinction is a major possibility due to climate change. Although, here's another inconvenient truth. Some people claim that climate change is all natural and we shouldn't worry about it. Well, it is true that we have indeed had naturally occurring climate change since the beginning of the Earth. But they have yet to understand that almost 30% of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have increased since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And that is ultimately caused by human activities. Well, here's another clear proof that the Earth isn't going anywhere but we are. Try peeking at everything. The latest IPCC report states that we are nearly 50 years away from running out of every resource that our society runs on. Oil, natural gas, coal, everything. Oil is estimated to run out by the year of 2050. And if we use natural gas to fill in the gaps, it is estimated to run out by the year 2060. However, we have to remember that we were given so much. We are placed not too near to the sun that we don't burn, but not too distant that we don't turn to ice. Yet, we have forgotten that everything contributes to the perfection of Mother Nature. In short, we're just taking things for granted. Well, that's enough bad news. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. It has dawned upon me that this is not a Marvel story where there are superheroes to save us at the end of the day. In this story, we are the superheroes. We can tackle this problem if we know what we need to do. We just need to know what we need to do. Lots of solutions have been talked about, but what about the solution that's right in front of us? Something you and I are so familiar with. Would you believe me if I tell you that there is this magic machine that sucks in carbon, costs very little, and the amazing part is that it builds itself? It's called a tree. A tree is an exceptional example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabed, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they all take in carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a wonderful tool that we can use to protect and save our climate. Although, here's the craziest part. When nature is doing something vital for us, we are doing the exact opposite by destroying it faster than ever before. Believe me when I say tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 to 40 football pitches every minute. And the destruction of nature accounts for more global emission than all the trucks and cars in the world. We can put solar panels on every house, turn every vehicle into electrical ones, but as long as the Sumatra burns, as long as the Amazon is being cut down, our climate goals will have failed. Protecting and restoring nature is very simple and anyone can do it. It's been virally used by a lot of people nowadays. Let me tell you an interesting story about a remarkable man from India who can change your perception. Meet Jaya, also known as the Forest Man of India. He has spent almost 30 years of his life planting trees, eventually creating a real one-man-made forest of 1,360 acres and restoring wildlife in it. The forest is known as the Molai Forest, and it is larger than the New York City Central Park. If one man can do that much, imagine what 8 billion people in the world can do if we put our minds together. Besides, empowering the youth is also one of the ways to protect ourselves from the effects of climate change. This is because young people, we, make up almost 42% of the world's population. That's a lot of people. We're literally talking about billions of people here. But the point that I'm making is that these are the most connected generation that's ever been, because we have access to borderless tools and technologies which allows us to share our voices, experience, as well as our knowledge. Youth empowerment can give us, the young people, the skill set that we need to take charge of our own destiny, to create a better, brighter future for ourselves and our communities. Additionally, we as individuals need to have this change in mindset that this is not a partisan debate, and solving this crisis is not a question of politics, but more of a moral obligation. Protecting our future in this planet depends on the conscious evolution of our species, and the most powerful weapon that we have in our hands is the person in the mirror, for at the end of the day, that's who we can control. It is time for us to choose a different path so that we can leave a world worth living in for our children in the future. We don't have to do something extravagant. We can always start out with something simple, such as going vegan or just leading a minimalist lifestyle. It may sound simple, but when a large number of us are doing it, the results would be mind-blowing. As young prodigy Greta Thunberg had already mentioned, production is made upon our demand. So if we demand for change while changing our consumption, production will have to follow. And then a massive change is a major possibility. And it's not too late to take action for our future to protect ourselves and our children. Moreover, our governments also must enter crisis mode by urgently investing in and implementing policies to reduce carbon in the atmosphere. But here's the craziest thing. Even if the government banned all greenhouse gas emissions today, climate change will still affect the future generation. Therefore, humanity is somewhat committed to some level of climate change. Due to the fact that we are already committed to some level of climate change, responding to climate change can involve a two-pronged approach, mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation could be defined as addressing the causes of climate change by reducing and stabilizing the levels of heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. For example, according to the CO2 emission from fuel combustion highlights 2017 edition, Malaysia's CO2 emission is among the highest in ASEAN countries. It does sound believable, doesn't it? Seeing the number of vehicles on the road, it is quite believable. But therefore, to tackle this issue, the low carbon mobility blueprint and action plan is yet to be announced, whereby the land transportation sector will see tremendous improvement in accessibility and connectivity for a better environment and a healthier lifestyle. Meanwhile, adaptation could be defined as adapting to the climate change which is already in the pipeline, so that we are not vulnerable to the effects in the future, meaning that we are already prepared for the effects that we might face in the future. One example would be Singapore, where they are actually building stronger sea defenses against rising sea levels. Just as that, our country is also taking measures, which could be prominently seen in the speech by our ex-Energy, Science, Technology, Environment and Climate Change Minister, Ying, as she stated that Malaysia will adapt the infrastructure and building codes to meet unpredictable weather conditions in the future. Over and above that, we should already start protecting ourselves from the effects of climate change, because it won't take long enough for Mother Nature to fight back. She's been here for about 4.5 billion years. That's like 22,500 times more than us. And yes, our future depends on her. She doesn't really need people, but we desperately need her. If humans don't figure out that we're a part of nature rather than just using nature, mankind wouldn't survive. It's as simple as that. She, Mother Nature, has covered this planet entirely once, and it doesn't take long to cover it again. This is the core truth. If we are to survive in this planet, the only known home to any one of us for our future, for our safety, for our climate, we need nature, now more than ever. We are given one home, and it is our obligation to protect it. Nature doesn't need us, but we need nature. So let's turn up our phones, let's roll up our sleeves, and let's fight climate change together for a better future. With that being said, I'm Suvitha Balakrishnan. Thank you for listening to me, and have a good day. And remember, it's our call now. Thank you.
Thank you, Suvitha. That was a very impressive sharing. Then she said, Suvitha is actually a delegate from our previous youth conference called the Building Bridges for Sustainable Development and Production. That's the profile picture she's in, and we are definitely glad to have her back with us today morning. So thank you so much to all the three storytellers, and to audiences. Thank you for following so far. I hope you have managed to learn one or two new things about climate change. So before we move on to the next part, we would like to know your opinion by answering a very short poll. This will take just 1 minute of your time. Please help us gather some inputs by answering this question. Okay, I think most of y'all have answered. Thank you so much. Let me just show the result. Right, so most of y'all would like to see social innovation online lessons to be shared more, followed by webinars on environmental topics and communication on environmental issues. Thank you so much. This will give us more insights on the type of public engagement we should do, in terms of environmental education. Okay. Right, now for the next part, I would like to welcome our credible speaker for this session, Dr. Renard Siew. He's online with us. Hi, Dr. Renard.
Hello, hi, Mati. Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Renard serves as the Climate Reality Leader under the Climate Reality Project and also as the co-chair of the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Working Committee. So while he enlightens us on the climate change issue, feel free to deposit your questions to him directly by clicking on the Slido link in the chat box, and we hope to receive your questions. So Dr. Renard, then she said.
Thanks again, Mati. I think first up, I just wanted to congratulate all three speakers, Zoe, Muthalib, and Suvitha, for such an inspiring presentation. I mean, I could literally feel your passion just oozing out from my laptop screen, and also very well researched as well. I think there were a lot of facts and figures that, to be completely honest with you, when I was a teenager myself or a youth, I don't even think I could be doing half, the presentation that you guys were sharing with us today. So well done on that. And also to WWF for creating such an excellent platform. I think there is a lot to be said about, the climate crisis that is happening on a global basis. Scientists have warned that we only have a dozen of years left to cap temperatures from increasing by 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is basically the ambition of the Paris Agreement. Beyond this increase in temperature, we will be observing like a lot of far more catastrophic events, floods, droughts, forest fires. They're already all happening even in this region, as had been pointed out by the presenters this morning. In December 2019, we have observed some of the worst Australian bush fires in history. A lot of wildlife had been lost. A lot of peatlands were on fire. And even in parts of Malaysia, like a couple of years back, we have experienced some of the worst haze situation. We have experienced water scarcity issues in parts of Selangor. And it's important to just remember that all of this impacts our livelihood. It impacts our accessibility to even basic things like water, right? Because climate change creates this whole phenomenon that we call intervariability of rainfall. So areas that used to get high volumes of water no longer get as much water as they used to. And we have seen that, in the Selangor Dam, right? And in terms of water accessibility to our citizens. There's also, issues around food security. For every 1 degree Celsius of increase in temperature, like we're actually seeing a drop, right, in the yield or production of important crops, like rice, maize, or corn, which makes up about 2/3 of human calorific intake. So all of this has repercussions. And also, as had been pointed out earlier, climate change is, a major health impact, a major health issue, especially when it comes to things like deforestation. In fact, one of the theories that have been put forth is that COVID-19, the pandemic that we're currently facing, needs to be framed as a planetary health emergency because of the rampant deforestation that has been happening. Also in this part of the world, what has happened is that it is bringing wildlife much closer to human beings. It creates basically a platform that is really conducive for zoonotic processes to take place. You know, viruses jumping from wildlife to human beings. So there is a lot that remains to be known. There's a lot that we don't know yet, which is really terrifying and scary. And you know, with global warming happening and with increase of temperatures, we will also be seeing, you know, the melting of ice glaciers, permafrost, which is basically thick layers of soil that has been frozen for many, many centuries. When they start melting, we don't know what sort of viruses or bacteria that is lurking underneath the soil. There's no way of finding out. So in many ways, some scientists have put forth this idea that the COVID-19 pandemic that we're currently facing is really a dress rehearsal for what is to come. And I guess the last point that I wanted to drive home is just the power and the role of youth. So, you know, I always believe that youths are not the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today. You know, as you can see, like people in the likes of Greta Thunberg, like they are stepping up and, you know, they're making their voices heard. They're representing marginalized communities. They're giving voice to the voiceless. So such platform, you know, such as Sembang WWF really provides, you know, an opportunity for youth voices to be heard. And I would strongly encourage, you know, each and every one of you to continue to step up, right? To continue to do the amazing work that you do, continue to represent your various communities. From the survey that we have seen that Marty had shown to us earlier, a lot of you wanted to see more environmental topics, especially around social innovation. And that also resonates a lot with me, because I think in this day and age, it's not enough to be able to, you know, just be aware of a certain issue, but we also need to translate awareness into action. And having discourse about, you know, what are some people are doing, what are some of the projects that are being done in our region on a global basis, how we can actually take some of those ideas in our own backyard to replicate and scale up those solutions. I think that's going to be important. And that, to me, at least, I see that as activism 2.0, like where you're going to see young activists, like some of you, really stepping up to the plate and taking action, right, for impact. And that's really where we're heading towards. So I guess I'll end on that note. I'll pass it back to Marty if you have further questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Renard. That was a very profound thought, and I'm sure we'll be learning more as we ask more questions in a while. But before we start, could you tell us a few words about yourself or your background and your experience working on the Climate Reality Project?
Sure. Yeah, so part of what we do at the Climate Reality Project is really to raise awareness on climate action. So we are actually, what Climate Reality leaders do is that we have this series of talks that we call Truth in 10 Minutes. So we will talk about, you know, the impacts of climate change, what's currently happening in the world on a global basis, what can you do about it, which is really brainstorming and thinking about solutions, and then lastly, committing to it. So looking through, you know, the different types of progress, projects. So our role is really as mentors, you know, to provide guidance to make sure that you sort of succeed and think about what makes your project successful. So that really sort of just sums up what we do at Climate Reality.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be, we heard from our storytellers earlier about cutting down our own carbon footprint. While we strive as an individual to halve the footprint, but how can industries do the same as well? How can they minimize the climate change effects and further risks?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because businesses and corporates do have a large carbon footprint. I think as a start in Malaysia, one of the things that they must do is measure what their carbon footprint is. Because as it stands, I think a lot of corporations are still at that stage where, you know, they're not aligned to the greenhouse gas protocol. They don't really know yet, you know, like how to report their carbon emissions. Like in technical terms, we call it, you know, your scope 1 direct emissions and scope 2 indirect emissions. So they must first and foremost establish how much is it that they're emitting through their business, and then secondly, to set reduction targets. So, you know, making a commitment to actually reducing it and thinking about what sort of initiatives can be implemented in the industries, in the different organizations to cut down on these emissions. Because at the end of the day, I think, you know, Malaysia has a 45% commitment, right, towards reducing our, you know, carbon emissions, like the NDCs that we've committed ourselves towards. So, you know, different industries, you know, regardless of whether you're in plantation and the property sector, motors, automobile transportation, like you all have an important role to play in committing to this agenda.
Right. Thank you. From the survey earlier, we found out that most respondents are worried about not having access to resources such as clean air, food, and clean water, and you've mentioned it as well. And the second highest impacts that they are worried about is, you know, increase in unpredictable weather. So we've heard again from our storytellers about different types of impact climate change has on our environment and, you know, on our food production, freshwater availability and all. But maybe you could share on how does it impact on public health, especially in physical and even mental health risk, like, and what are the ways to reduce this impact? How can we move forward, especially, you know, in our current situation now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people have drawn comparisons between the COVID-19 pandemic and what is to come, right? Which is, you know, the climate crisis. So as far as the climate crisis is concerned, I think there are still a lot of uncertainties. It is a public health issue. So as some of the speakers had alluded to earlier, I think Zoe did a fantastic presentation where she spoke about the haze situation, which has a direct impact on breathing, right? And you know, the increase in things like respiratory diseases. I think Suvitha and Muthalib has touched a little bit on issues around food security, and especially given a lockdown, you know, situation that most countries are facing, this could very well be a serious issue. But one of the key steps or initiatives that I've seen people taking is they have basically gone digital. So you're seeing a lot of increase in innovative food apps, you know, like Food Panda, Grab, who's able to sort of deliver food to your doorstep. In the Philippines, you have seen something that one of my friends started, the Move Food Initiative, that aims to basically bring farmers together to help distribute food to increase accessibility, especially to vulnerable communities, right, where access is really a problem. So I think it's important to just, you know, like think about innovative solutions, and I think a lot of these initiatives are really developed, or a lot of these new ideas that have surfaced actually come from youths, you know, like younger people. So you know, there's a saying that if you know, if there's only a hammer, if you're only using a hammer, right, as a tool, like everything else looks like a nail to you. But it's important to sort of think out of the box, you know, to be really creative, to be really innovative, and I think younger people are really an asset in that regard. A lot of the innovations that we're seeing do come from this particular demographic, and I hope to see a lot more coming from Malaysia. So that's really on the I suppose some of the concerns around the physical issues that we're facing, but also what is important to address is mental health. And I think this is an area that has not been spoken about enough by the media. So a lot of youth especially, they are absolutely very concerned about the future. You know, they've been hearing a lot of catastrophic events that are happening, you know, worldwide. You know, your forest fires in Australia, like water security issues, like people falling ill, like dying because of floods and drought situation. It's very unsettling to most people, and it can definitely have an impact on the mental health of younger people. I think what is important is to be able to talk about it, like find a peer or a group that you can join that shares a similar concern, right? And once you have that, I think the next stage is really to see if you can do something about it, to brainstorm innovative solutions, because it's important to remember that you're not facing this alone. Thousands, like millions of people out there are also having the same predicament. And I think it's important to be able to use that vulnerability, that discomfort, and turn it into something more positive, right? To turn it into a positive story that inspires the whole world. And I think platforms that you know what WWF does is absolutely very crucial, very important to sort of facilitate that process. So we don't just want to have a discourse, you know, talk about awareness, and then, you know, we go off forgetting about it completely. We want to be able to turn it into something actionable, something that has impact, and then, you know, monitor that sort of progress that we're making. And I think that's where we need to be.
Thank you so much. I agree with what you said. We are not in this alone, and you know, it's important to move forward as a community rather than individual. And of course, you know, we are all interlinked, so every individual actions will add up to the bigger impact. We actually have a few questions from audience. Okay. The first question is, why is it so difficult for government to adapt climate change mitigation policy? How do you look at this, Dr. Renard?
Yeah, I think as far as governments are concerned, well, I mean, in the past, we used to have a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, and that obviously has been renamed to the Ministry of Environment and Water, I believe. There is a lot of bureaucracy, I would say, to a certain extent. You know, especially when it comes to issues around climate change, right? It's complex, right? And it affects so many different ministries within the government. To be able to cascade and communicate that just among the ministries, that in itself poses a huge challenge, right? Because as we know, climate change is all interconnected. It's a nexus. It connects the Ministry of Sciences, because every decision or policy that we make needs to be based on scientific evidence, right? And then there's also Ministry of Agriculture. Like, you know, remember we spoke about things like food security. How do we embed, you know, climate change risks to ensure food resilience in the future? So they also need to come into picture. And then we have MOSTI, the Ministry of Science, Technology, Innovation, where a lot of the innovative ideas and digitalization, you know, the use of AI to help increase resilience, they need to come in too. So just the amount of coordination is really massive. But what I would say is that, you know, while governments do have their role to play in enacting certain policies, potentially even looking at, you know, enacting a climate change act, which was discussed a couple of years back. I think what is important to remember is that we must play our part, regardless of whether you're a government entity, you are an NGO, even the fact that you are a citizen in Malaysia. You have an important role to play in helping to mobilize climate action. No action is too small, right? You know, every action has and leads to an impact. even having a basic conversation with someone, you just never know where that leads to. It could lead to more partnerships, more collaborative efforts, tons of opportunities.
Right, thank you. That brings us to the next question, which is similar to the very first one. And you said everyone need to play a part. So how about us as a consumer? How can we hold businesses or organizations accountable for their actions if they do not comply with the environmental policy?
Yeah, I think it's important to be a responsible consumer. When I say responsible, it means making conscious decisions about, the little things, the day-to-day things in our lives. For example, when making a decision, right, to dine out, and someone offers you a straw, right, a plastic straw, like refuse it, say no, like, you can do without. Opt to take public transport, right, as much as possible, or carpool if you're heading towards the same destination with your friends, because that helps to cut down emissions. Switch off the electricity when you're not using it. I think the whole list of things to do that for as a consumer is just endless, but it's important to sort of educate ourselves, right? So even I think over the years, there's just been this increase in the number of sustainability or green certifications. For example, in the palm oil industry, you have the Round Table of Sustainable Palm Oil RSPO certification. So when you're making a purchase, for example, of palm oil products, be on the lookout for such endorsement by the organization, because having that certification, that label alone says a lot. It means that you are actually making a conscious purchase, like to buying products that have been produced sustainably, and that goes a long way towards helping the ecosystem, both planet and people thrive.
True. Thank you. And you gave one example on RSPO, and we have many certifications for different products, including the fair trades and everything. So I guess us as a consumer, we should really be aware and continuously learning about all this and how our purchases makes us are the sustainable choices in our daily life. We also have a question about career. From someone. What course in university should I go for if I want to have a career like you, Dr. Renard?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So when we talk about sustainability, there are so many different areas of sustainability. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's literally 12 areas of impact that you could be involved with. So to be completely honest with you, there are traditional courses such as environmental sciences and engineering, which gives you a little bit more depth into technicalities relating to the environment. You can be a biodiversity expert, or you can even be an environmental engineer, someone who conducts environmental impact assessments. But I've also seen lawyers coming into this space or pursuing a career in this area. So lawyers, obviously, as you know, like are people who enact or who are very familiar with certain legislations, and we need more of that. Like we need environmental laws to be enacted. We need experts and specialists in this area. Or you can even be an accountant if you like. So I've seen a lot of actually accountants. So in the past, what they do is that they only look at financial numbers. But in this day and age, financial markets have basically, stepped up to the plate. Bursa Malaysia, for example, are ranking and following how some of our top 100 corporations are doing in terms of sustainability. So, people who are good with numbers, like instead of just looking at financial matrix, they're now looking at sustainability matrix, which cuts across things like carbon, water, waste, footprint. So I don't think there is a cookie cut answer to this. I think many different fields, people who pursue different courses can, at some stage in their life, make a conscious decision to be sustainable, to pursue a career in this space. And I personally met a lot of them throughout the years. Yeah.
Thank you. And to whoever asked the question, I hope you have a better input on how to proceed with your career. We have one question from Miss Purani. For humans to act, we need them to relate with the environmental problem first. Is it going to be from a human perspective? Is this the only way to relate to them? And we have a similar question on, most people are aware of the effects of our actions that can cause climate change, but why is it so hard to convince people to contribute or to take climate action?
I think communication is something that is quite tricky, partly because you have different demographics in society. The way that I communicate the impacts of climate change to a 5 or a 6-year-old kid would be very different from the way that I communicate with scientists or people in academia. And it would also be very different from the way that I communicate the impacts of climate change to someone in the business or corporate sector. But what is important to understand is, or one of the flaws that most people have pointed out is sometimes when we communicate climate change, we tend to talk about it, 30,000 feet above ground. We talk about, IPCC reports. We throw a lot of jargons, like carbon disclosure project, CDP, scope 1, scope 2 emissions, NDCs, UNF, triple C. There are so many different terminology that sometimes it intimidates who you're speaking to. They get so afraid that, they feel like, they can't really make a difference in this space because they're not technical enough. So I think it's important to be sort of mindful that we don't fall into that trap. And as what was pointed out in the question is, do we need more human-centered approach in the way that we tell our stories? I say absolutely yes. In fact, if you look at some of the more effective activists out there in the world, like who are human rights or climate change advocates, a lot of them usually shares stories of their own experience, because stories are powerful. They shape perception. They hit into the heartstrings of most people. So it's important to sort of remember that it's not just hate knowledge that you are communicating with, but you also need to communicate with heart, with passion. And when people feel that, like it sort of inspires them towards, wanting to take action. So it's important to sort of have that balance between heart and mind. A tricky one, I would say, and sometimes it takes practice throughout the years to get it right.
Thank you for sharing, your perspective, and it's true. It takes different type of narratives and communication to send our message, right? And to those who ask, how can we pressure the government? How can we, as a youth, to take more action? I would suggest you to join the third session later at 4 p.m. as we'll be speaking to activists from Malaysia Youth Delegation, and she would share how she played a role in talking about climate crisis and how she managed to voice out about taking climate action. So thank you again, Dr. Renard, for your valuable time and answering all our questions and sharing insights from your experience. I guess we all can start making small changes that will contribute to bigger impacts, especially in our dietary options or making sustainable choices in our daily life. And again, there's a lot of knowledge resources out there these days that could help us to make the change. With that being said, before we wrap up our first session of Sembang, we actually have a very short quiz for you to see how much you have gained and learned from the sessions. So you could click on the link is in the chat box, or you could go to joinmyquiz.com and key in the following code. We'll start the quizzes in 1 minute. See you there. All right, I think most of you all have answered the quiz, and I think we have a winner called Markward Moon. Whoever it is, congratulations. And thank you so much for joining us today. Before we end the session, we have our CEO of WWF Malaysia in the call with us. So can I just invite her to share her thoughts and with all of us for a while. Hi, Sophia.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It is so good for me to join this session, this Sembang session, which is held in, of course, in conjunction with the World Environmental Day yesterday. And it's good to note that the participations that we had this morning, I understood that the speakers all came very well prepared. And I've also had a chance to, of course, join part of the session where I've heard the experts speak. And it's also good to know that the participants are all consisting, of course, the students and the parents. And, it gives us a lot of motivation, if you will, to know that the public is with us, more so from the young group like yourselves. And I've also noted from the last session that there's been quite a bit of robust questions been asked, which to me reflects the interest on climate change. And as I said, that's very invigorating. I like what Marty said, and I will reiterate that. We are all here to make small changes to bigger impact. And to all of you, I really thank you, and I invite you to really help us spread the awareness and the need to mitigate the risk of climate change, because whether we like it or not, it has an impact on all of us, on our planet and on our home. So let's do our part. And as I like to stress again, your participation motivates us all in WWF to do what we have to do to support the New Deal for nature and people, and to ensure that we have a healthy planet for today, and most importantly, for the future. So thank you very much, and I hope to at some stage join you all again in similar sessions. Thank you, Marty, for the invite for me to say a few words.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for your time. And to the rest of the participants, thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope the knowledge that you've gained today, goes beyond awareness, and all of us takes action. So if you'd like to know more about our work on education for sustainable development, please check out our website and also our Instagram. We have regular updates. And also, I'd like to invite all of y'all to join us at the next session at 2 p.m. and at 4 p.m. we'll be learning more about New Deal for nature and people, and how can youth take more action in voicing out against climate change. With that, thank you so much. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.